Hiya. Welcome back to Talking Insights. I'm your host, Antonio, and today I want to bring a paradox to the discussion. Now, we've all seen it. Two companies operating in the exact same market with similar budgets and talent, yet one scales consistently year after year while the other remains stuck in a cycle of stagnation. Is growth a matter of luck, or is it calculated architectural choice? Today's guest argues the latter. Lucas Hulsebos. He's the CEO of DVJ Insights and the author of a brand new book, The Growth Decision, Leadership, Strategy, and the Architecture of Sustainable Brand Growth. With over 30 years in market research and a decade leading to brand growth platform, Lucas has interviewed over 400 CMOs and studied more than 1,000 marketing professionals across Europe and the US. He's here to pull back the curtain on what he calls the strategic growth gap, the structural difference between the brands that win and the ones that just survive. Today, we're moving past the typical growth frameworks to talk about the hard leadership choices required to build a brand under pressure. Lucas, welcome to the show. I know that you have a new book, The Growth Decision. I want to know everything about it. I think the topic is very interesting, how to build sustainable brand growth and all of that. I think it brings a very, very interesting point on like the whole leadership strategy, this whole vision for brands. And I want to know more about it. But firstly, I want to start by asking, what is the strategic growth gap? You mentioned this on the book. Why is it usually such a leadership problem and not like a marketing one?
Yeah. So in the book, I talk a lot about the strategic growth gap, and that's actually something that already intrigues me since the start of our brand growth platform, which was 10 years ago. And in the past 10 years, we interviewed, well, I don't know exactly 25,000 marketing professionals all over the world. And one of the things that we look at is if you look at companies that are in the same situations, sometimes in the same category, or sometimes in the same market, in the same category, we see big differences between companies that are able to grow or build demand over time, and there are companies that are not able to do that. And the circumstances are the same, the audiences are the same, but one company is able to grow and others not. And so what we've done is we've looked at those companies more in detail. If I present that somewhere, I always talk about winners and losers, which is not so nice to say, but there's a big difference between companies that constantly do better and companies that are not able to grow or stagnate. And those differences are and for me, the strategic growth gap is actually that difference. The difference in activities that companies that win do compared to the companies that don't win don't. And there are very structural differences between those two companies. And what I also introduced in the book, it's more related to the growth paradox, because you already mentioned in your introduction that growth is a very interesting and nice theme. A lot of people talk about that. What I always found striking is there's quite some success of a few evidence-based writers, like Byron Sharp and Les Binet and Peter Field and Mark Ritson. They look a lot at evidence-based marketing and they look at growth, but growth in science is not actually a science. So you have psychology or economics and marketing and finance, but growth is not a science by itself, although we know a lot about growth. What I found always, so it's not that we don't have the knowledge. The knowledge is everywhere to understand better what you should do to grow, but the results are not. And in my opinion, the differences between companies that grow and companies that stagnate or don't grow, so the strategic growth gap, is purely related to the decisions that the leaders make. And that's also why I called my book The Growth Decision. Are you really deciding for growth?
That's very interesting. That, again, like sometimes we keep talking about the growth and all the way that the company can grow and everything. But I feel like sometimes we also need to look, as you were saying, like to the companies that are stalling. They're just like going without really any movements. Are there any ingredients let's say, which are usually like the broken links that need fixing first when you're looking at these companies?
Yeah, there are a lot. So what I think so if you look at the literature around growth, it's very easy to say that you grow if you build penetration. It's not so difficult to say that, but how do you actually do that? So what we've done in our research is that we've looked at a lot of different ingredients. What are the tools that marketing have? And that already starts with the role of marketing in the organization or the role of the marketing leader. And what is very interesting to see already is that there's a huge difference in the position marketing has. And so companies that have marketing not in the C-suite or not on a prominent position in the organization, they're more represented in the group that stagnate. So giving marketing a stronger position already is a very important decision. Because marketing can be a leader for growth. And then there are lots of different things. It's the choice of the KPIs you use. For example, companies that put revenue or revenue growth, which is the best way actually to represent demand, is that put as the most important KPI, they're more successful than companies that look at efficiency or other KPIs. And then there are lots of different ingredients, like how do you define the moment of truth? What is the role of creativity? How much do you invest in innovation? How consistent is the strategy? How do you work with data? What is the way you use media? And so each of these ingredients, they tell a different story. And I think that if you are not growing as a company, you should go systematically through these ingredients. And there's not one single truth. I think it's a combination. It's more like a system that you have to realize and where you have to look at all the different ingredients in order to come to the best solution. Because it would be easy if there was one formula or one method. But there's also, sometimes it's also really hard. So consistency is a very important ingredient. But if you consistently decline or decrease, should you then stick to that?
Yeah.
And so that it is always a trade-off. But you see that companies that do not well, the first thing they do is they stop investing in innovation, they stop investing in capabilities and people, and they stop investing in data. And that's and that if you do that, it goes worse over time. And then sometimes you see that there's a focus on increasing the short-term efficiency, which basically covers the real problem because that there's not demand built over time. And that starts with using the right KPI.
You mentioned KPIs, and I think it's very interesting because it leads to my next question. We nowadays have so many data, so many numbers, so many everything, analytics, it's all over the place. And that goes for the leaders of the companies as well. Like, I feel like, I mean, we've done episodes and we've done events everywhere. And sometimes leaders and people like on the C-suite, they keep telling like, I have too many numbers. I don't know where to go. I don't know how to look into those. Like sometimes they feel like they're drowning in them. Is there a way to distinguish between this noise and direction and come up with a direction to make better decisions and better, ways to go for the company?
Yeah, absolutely. I think focus helps. Focus also means choosing not so many KPIs. If I look at the situation of DVJ, we're active in a world of market research. The choice, when we did the presentation, I had a conversation with Mark Ritson and we talked about what our drives for growth. And one of the things he mentioned was category choice. Well, I don't know if you can choose the category. As a research company, we don't have the category in favor of us. We have a category that is not growing so hard. It depends a little bit on what source you use, but it's definitely not a growing category, which means that product becomes more important, and it's also a strong focus on what you actually want to do. And as a company, I decided when I started 12 years ago, there are only two KPIs that matter for us because those two KPIs, they represent what I want. The first thing is I want to put in quality first, always. And I think the best KPI that represents that is revenues, the trust clients give in you, not profitability, not efficiency, not other things, not awareness, just simple revenues as the core KPI. The second thing I wanted to build was an organization where everyone feels at home. So the best place to work. I developed an instrument. We call that the happy meter. It's a daily instrument that measures the satisfaction of the company. And those two KPIs are always the most important KPIs. It drives every decision. So I think the best thing, if you want to use data in the best way, you have to choose what KPI is for you the most important one, and then link every decision to it. So to make it very practical, we as a company are being asked sometimes to open offices outside of Europe. I know that working in different time zones does impact our happy meter negatively. So the decision not to do that is related to the core KPI. So always link the KPI with the decision and then focus. Choose one or two KPIs that are really the most important one and use all the rest as supporting material, because we use so many data, but we always have that hierarchy of data. These are the two main KPIs, and the rest is supporting to understand it better. And in that sense, so understanding data, I sometimes hear people say less is more, or less data is better. I don't believe that's true. I think more data is better. But the only thing is, if you don't look at data from a decision, then it doesn't help. And that's a lot. So there are also a lot of companies popping up because they have found new data via AI or via other passive sources. But if you don't know what decision that data drives, then the data is useless. So you have to always, in my opinion, always link data to the decision and then make a strong hierarchy. And in the first layer, create focus and use as less KPIs as necessary. But in the second layer, for support, use as much as possible of all the data that's out there. That's also what we see in the data of the companies that do really.
Yeah. Um, when we think about, or at least when I think about growth, I always think about those brands that kind of shape the culture in a way. And we think about like the ways that companies make all these campaigns to, growing and building the brands along the culture or shaping the culture with it. And they kind of try to hack the culture in a sense by jumping on memes or trending topics or whatever it is. Is there a difference between a brand that follows the culture versus one that actually tries to shape it or successfully shapes it?
I think you make a very important point. I think in every organization, culture is important. I think that, so what I said is the second KPI or the first KPI, I only use two KPIs, is related to culture, because the result is the happy meter, and the percentage of happy smileys every day, because that's what it actually is a result of culture. And culture needs to be captivated from the start in every layer of the organization. I also think that things like HR should not be the same like innovation or marketing. If you make that a separate discipline in an organization, it becomes more difficult to keep that. So if you make innovation, the responsibility for innovation for a small group, it will lead to less innovation and make the whole company responsible. That I think that's also for culture. Culture is really important. That is why we as a company, and that's I see that also with other companies, you have a certain core values, and in your organization, that's what you're driving. And I think that if you can keep that, I think Domino's is a really nice example of a company that has been able to grow significantly, keeping the culture alive. But I see that with many different, so we have part of our research is that we interview CMOs and marketing directors about what is important. And I think that the most successful company, they have a very strong, strong idea about culture. And you have to captivate your culture. You cannot just link that. And yeah, you're right. The companies that win, they also set tone. But consistency is also there very important. This is what we want to be. And also all the decisions that you make, they have to be in line with that.
And I feel like even like the younger generation, the young professionals joining the workforce or joining the new companies, they do value a lot of the culture, and they do see if they're a fit in the company culture, if they also want to be there. So that's also a way to like get new people and get good quality people to the companies. Work on the culture.
Yeah. And I think also that's also a little bit related to purpose. You mentioned the younger generation. what we see in organizations that are able to grow, they make purpose and culture part of everyone. And they don't separate that in a corporate team or something that is now there's one team deciding on purpose and another team deciding on the marketing strategy and the media campaigns, etc. No, it has to be integrated. Also, what I describe in the book, there's a whole chapter about leadership and how you connect. And also in the latest study that we've done with 3,000 marketing professionals in Europe, the results are just released. What we saw there is that the biggest challenge is to link disciplines. How do we deal with technology and AI? And how do we integrate disciplines more? And separating, and especially purpose or that kind of thing, separating it from the business, I think that's not the best. At least the companies that do that are not the most successful ones.
Yeah. No, it needs to have like a way to go. Everyone in the company should know where we're going, like what's the purpose, what's the direction that the company wants to go, or where they want to achieve. And I feel like nowadays, especially like you were mentioning AI, and everyone, like, you go to conferences, you go to events all over the world, and everyone's always like, we need to jump on that, we need to jump on the best new thing, the next shiny new thing. Like, now it's AI, it was some other things before, it was the internet, fax machines, all of those things. Like, people try to go there, like, we need to jump on that, but if they don't have the vision, then
I think that's a very important point. So AI is an accelerator. AI makes things faster, better, but it's really important. What do you accelerate? So if you have a lousy strategy, you make it even worse with AI. Because you make it, and also the risk of AI is because there's so much possibilities to focus on the short term that you forget about the long term. So you really have to make sure what is the moment that you use AI. Sometimes I use AI a lot in everything that I do. And at the end of certain projects or processes, I'm sometimes not so happy with the end results. And if I then look, hey, how did I approach this? Almost in all of those projects, I started too early with AI. I used AI before my thinking was not done yet. And I think that if you are ready and your thinking is done, then you should use AI to accelerate and make things speedy. And what you see, I think, too often, especially in the research industry, is that AI is used to focus on efficiency because it's easy. It's easy to use AI to make to automate a process or to write a script that makes things faster. But what are you then? What are you accelerating? I think that's always for me a very important question. And if the strategy is not good, then AI doesn't help. If the strategy is good, then AI is a multiplier.
absolutely. I have one last point. I want to look into DVJ because you've been growing for over a decade, right? Without outside investors, you've been just growing in a very scalable way, in a very direct line way. Is there one of the principles that was harder to stick when you were scaling your own business?
Of course. Most important, the most important thing I believe is that we have chosen to focus on quality and added value, and also to focus. In the especially in the beginning, we wanted to focus on what can we do really good and what not. And clients sometimes have questions that are outside what you can be really good, but it's easy to integrate. But sticking to the principles and saying, no, we focus on what we're good at. And that was the most difficult one because sometimes you have opportunities to win a big project, which is outside of the focus and the strategy. So it keeps people busy and and it's sometimes tempting because you also need the revenue sometimes. Sticking to that principle, no, we only focus on what we're good at, especially new people when they join DVJ, they always like to look, hey, we can also do that. It's outside a little bit of about the domains that we've chosen or the industries we work on. But I think that helped us a lot to focus on, because at the end of a project, it's always good if clients say, hey, they really, they did an excellent job. And one of the things that I see is that we are able to win a lot of the pitches we're in. We have a very high conversion rate. We hardly lose. So if a client chooses for DVJ, we tend to keep them. last time, especially we do a lot of continuous projects. Last year, I think it was over 60 projects that were continuous. All of them continue this year. So not one single dropout. And I think if you can combine that, then you start growing because then the base is solid, but it's also very tempting to go outside of because it's so easy to step into that or so easy to step into something else. It was the same when Corona was there. And during the pandemic, everything changes and and then you had a lot of conversations in the organization and we should do this or we should do that and I said well I think the most important thing is this is the best moment to show that our strategy works and so let's focus on quality, let's focus on added value, let's focus on content. That's what we did in that pandemic year. We also were able to grow over 20%. And I think that those moments, those are the when the temptation is high, is really big to deviate from the strategy. I think during those moments, stick to the strategy were the most decisive moment.
That's very good. And it's a very nice way to, to see the company, to go further with the company. And yeah, it's a nice way to thanks so much for also unveiling a bit the behind the scenes of it all. Good luck with the book. Thank you so much for the conversation. I will link everything in the description of this episode, the link for the book and more information. Lucas, thank you so much. It was a great conversation. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
All
Bye bye.
right. And as I said in the beginning, all the information is about the book will be available on the link in the description. So just click there, find all about it. Thanks again to Lucas for this time. And yeah, I hope to see you on the next one. And that's all for today, folks. Talking Insights is a production of Research World and SMR, bringing you the stories, voices, and ideas shaping the Insights community around the world. If you'd like to be featured in a future episodes, share your story, or learn more about sponsoring opportunities, send us an email at podcast@smr.org. And don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And join us next week for another great conversation. See ya.